Our month-long stroll down memory lane continues on New Sounds tonight with another program from the Vaults. It's an archive program from 1989 featuring an in-studio performance by England's Penguin Cafe Orchestra. Welcome once again to another edition of New Sounds, this time program number 220. I'm John Schaefer, and longtime listeners to this program will have heard the English group, the Penguin Cafe Orchestra, from time to time during the course of the years. And those same listeners will probably realize what a special treat it is for us today to be able to welcome the entire ensemble to the studios, including their leader and primary composer, Simon Jeffs, for what will be a series of live performances, and I'm sure a most enjoyable program. And Simon, it's certainly a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you very much.
This is actually, the second time that you've been in this country?
As the Penguin Cafe Orchestra, yes.
Yeah. You've toured Japan, though, a number of times, and the music seems to be pretty popular there as well as in England.
Yes, it was more popular in Japan than anywhere else for a while. When was it? 1982. Which was exactly 10 years after I'd been there the first time, when I actually conceived the idea of the orchestra. And when our second album came out in Japan, it just happened to be in Japan they have a trendy animal every year, and that year it was the year of the penguin. And so our second album just happened to fit in very nicely, immediately sold a tremendous amount, and made it possible for us to go there a couple of times to play.
Mm-hmm. The name itself is kind of eccentric. The first time you were here, you said that it was the result of a dream. But the program from your Los Angeles concert says that it actually is named after a real cafe in London. So which is it?
Well, basically they got it wrong in the program.
Mm-hmm.
They said they went out of their way for some reason to point out, it should be pointed out that the orchestra is named after a real cafe in Holborn in London. Well, there's only one word missing, which is not. So you could say it should be pointed out that it is not named after a real cafe in London, and that's the truth.
Well, that's kind of a nasty error. Speaking of nasty errors, are you okay over there? Do you need to change your shirt or something?
Yes, no, I just dropped my drink.
It'll evaporate.
This is marvelous. All right, so we're off to a flying start already, and we haven't even heard our first piece of music. All right, so we can talk maybe a bit more about the band and all of that, and the name of the group and the music itself. But first, let's hear a couple of pieces. We'll start with Air à Danser,
Oui.
And then a piece called From the Colonies, which is from one of your earliest recordings.
Yeah.
This is the whole group performing here, all seven of you?
Yes, well, here we are, live in the studio, so...
Okay, live performances from the Penguin Cafe Orchestra. Music from the Penguin Cafe Orchestra performed live on this edition of New Sounds. The members of the Penguin Cafe Orchestra are our guests on this edition of the program. And those members include Simon Jeffs, who does most of the composition work and plays a variety of instruments, among them the guitar and the ukulele, the quattro, and later on the piano. Stephen Fletcher playing the piano on that piece. Robert Loveday plays the violin. The viola is played by Jeffrey Richardson, who will be playing some mandolin and ukulele for us later on. The string section is rounded out by cellist Helen Liebman. On percussion, we have Julio Segovia and Paul Street playing the guitar and some ukuleles and quattro. The quattro has become one of the signature sounds of the ensemble, Simon.
Yes.
For people who are not familiar with the instrument, what is it and how did you find out about it?
Well, this one is very specifically Venezuelan, and it has 4 strings, and it's like the size, it's bigger than the ukulele but smaller than the guitar, and it's tuned the same as a ukulele except the 2 outside strings are an octave lower. It just has a very sort of warm, sweet sound, and I first heard one when I met a Venezuelan in London, a Venezuelan percussionist, and for me, in a way, it fits a gap between the ukulele and the guitar, and I think of it rather as a family of instruments, like a violin, viola, and cello, ukulele, quattro, guitar. It sort of feels comfortable.
So besides that, one of the other identifying trademarks of the sound is the fact that there doesn't seem to be a signature sound. I mean, the pieces are very versatile, very variable, and you will go from what sounds like a country western breakdown to something very classical very quickly, and often in the same piece.
Yeah. Well, I personally seem to have been through a procession of musical contexts in a way. I started out playing rock music at school, in the school group, and then I studied classical guitar and dropped out of a classical music college to join an avant-garde group, you know, in the 60s sense of the avant-garde, sort of Darmstadt thing, and dropped out of, I left that because it was too complicated, and became interested in ethnic music and sort of fringes of rock music. So because I've been in all those areas, they all speak to me a bit, and so they're inevitably going to come out in what I do myself. And I think if you added up all the other influences of all the other musicians in the room, there seems to be a strong element of people that started out young in classical music but dropped out, like so many billions of people do, because it seems a bit oppressive. And we're coming back to it sideways, in a way, reclaiming some of the good things of it for ourselves, like the acoustic instrumentation, the sort of textures, the string trio sort of feel, and the piano and acoustic instruments.
Last time we spoke, you were mentioning that you didn't like synthesizers and that you were trying to come to grips with this whole digital thing. Now, you're all acoustic today.
Yes.
Is that likely to stay that way for a while? Do you still find
it's ironic, really, because since I last saw you, we made another album.
Right, Signs of Life.
And I actually used the Prophet synthesizer on that, but very much behind the acoustic instruments. And recently I've become more and more interested in acoustic music without any kind of amplification, without any electronics. But at the same time I'm actually becoming more and more interested in the possibilities of digital recording, which seems to be about the nearest thing to what you get in a live acoustic sound.
We'll hear two more pieces next. The first is numbers 1 through 4.
1, 2, 4.
1, 2, 4.
Yes.
Okay. The distinction escapes me, but it's your title, so
You'll think of it in the bath tonight.
And then a piece called Telephone and Rubber Band.
Which we have pre-recorded the Telephone and the Rubber Band because we couldn't bring those from England.
So here I am saying how everything is
yes,
acoustic,
that's right.
And it's unamplified, and
but the sound of English telephone,
Okay. All right, numbers 1 to 4, and Telephone and Rubber Band. Once again, live performances in our studio by Simon Jeffs and the Penguin Cafe Orchestra. Simon, before we get on to another piece, a quick question about telephone and rubber band. I heard the telephone. Where was the rubber band?
Did you hear a bass instrument sort of going...
I assumed, Helen, that was you.
No, Helen was playing with a bow. That was actually the rubber band.
How about that? So it's on the same tape as the telephone?
Yes, and the rubber... I used to carry this chair around with the rubber... which I used to put the rubber band between the two sort of, whatever you would call them, on the back of the chair, stalks or whatever. And
I'm sure there's a name. I'm sure it's
well,
not
stalks,
but
it sticks up the back of a chair, and put the rubber band on and twang that. But the rubber band broke, and I could never find a rubber band which had the right note again. So I have to take the rubber band is on the tape now as well.
Okay. Now we mentioned before there is or was no place, the Penguin Cafe. Is there a place now, or have you ever thought maybe that it'd be...
When did we say there wasn't a place?
The LA program notes saying that there was a Penguin Cafe, and...
Oh, no. The LA program said that the Penguin Cafe was named after a real cafe in Holborn in London.
Right.
And when it should have said the Penguin Cafe was not named after a real cafe in Holborn in London.
Right. So is there now a real cafe with the name of Penguin Cafe? Is there now, or has there ever been? I feel like I'm conducting congressional hearings here.
Well, we have to be very specific about this because it is important, and the answer is sort of yes and no.
That's about as specific as we're going to get, is it?
Well, it is, but it's a long story.
Okay. Well, is there a Reader's Digest version of this story that you might favor us with?
Or maybe there will be. Well, it doesn't actually seem to exist as a specific location very often, but sometimes it does. There was a Penguin Cafe in London that Mick Kahn from the group Japan had started after hearing our first album. There was a Penguin Cafe in Tokyo directly related to one of our albums. But these places, they come up and then go away.
Yeah.
And while they're there, I mean, it was extraordinary. The one we visited in Tokyo was exactly the real Penguin Cafe, but it was just a momentary... It was there for about 6 months and then it went. But when you visited it, it was actually the place. So that's why I say yes and no.
Mm-hmm. All right, now you've recorded 4 records. You've got a 5th one, not only in the works, but I guess it's pretty much complete.
Yeah.
And that will be a live album.
Yeah.
Called what?
Called When in Rome.
And it was recorded in
London.
In London.
Yeah. It's music that's on our previous albums, but it's funny because our pieces are a bit like people. They sort of, the way I see it is that on the albums they're like babies because it's when the pieces were first thought up or written, and as time goes by, the pieces mature and grow up a bit. They get new bits tagged on and old bits taken off, and they get changed a bit. So the pieces are a bit older now, and in that sense they're they're different. They're teenagers. Yes,
they're teenagers at the moment.
I'd say this When in Rome is an album of teenagers, really.
I had some wildly interesting question. It just went right out of my head, but
I saw it leaving your head.
All right, well, let's move on to some more music then. We'll hear Beanfields and Paul's Dance. Now, Paul's Dance is another piece that's a couple of years old. It also appeared in the Malcolm soundtrack.
Yeah.
Beanfields is from Signs of Life, and has kind of a sort of a country fiddle type sound to it.
That's Bob's fault.
All right, well, Bob, then maybe you can...
Well, from my point of view, I've been doing country music in England for a long time, so when I heard this tune, it was a natural progression to sort of put that sort of feel to work on it.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, did Simon give you a part that had been written out that you just...
It came out as a tune on the ukulele, which naturally required the same sort of tune on the violin, but with much more of an elbow on it. The strong right elbow of the country fiddle player.
All right, we'll hear Beanfields and Paul's Dance. Now, on Paul's Dance, it's a scaled-down ensemble. The 7 musicians are not all playing.
No, it's just the 3 of us, because we're the 3 that play the ukuleles and the quattros.
Okay. All right, well, let's hear these performances once again from the Penguin Cafe Orchestra. Simon Jeffs is the composer, and the members of the group are our guests on this edition of New Sounds. We've just heard Paul's Dance, performed by 3 members of the Penguin Cafe Orchestra, and before that a piece called Beanfields. Simon Jeffs and Paul Street playing the ukuleles, and the quattro played by who? No,
Simon
I've got that
Jeffs.
wrong.
It's all right, though. Simon, I played the quattro, Jeffrey played one ukulele, and Paul played the other one.
Okay,
There
fine. And before that, Beanfields, which was a larger ensemble
Which was
piece.
everybody, yes.
One of the things that everyone, I think, who has heard your music has noticed, and it's always the same reaction, is it sounds familiar somehow, even if I've never heard it before.
Yeah. I don't know if I talked about it last time, but I mean, the clearest example of that came from a Japanese girl who wrote a letter saying, it's strange, she said, this music, when I first heard this music, it's as if I'd heard it a long time ago, I don't know why. And the fact that it could sound like that to a Japanese girl, and it certainly sounds that way to me, and it seems to sound that way to a lot of people, that's sort of, I mean, there's no explanation for it.
One of life's mysteries.
It really is.
I think it implies that there's a certain that the way that I'm writing these pieces, it means that it's coming from something which isn't mine, but it's ours, and therefore it's the familiarity is sort of somehow inevitable.
Yeah, I guess also the fact that you keep it relatively simple and don't have a lot of frippery around the edges to sort of obscure whatever the original idea was.
Yeah.
Helps a bit too. All right, well, we're going to listen next to Surface Tension and Oscar Tango. Now, these two pieces, you've worked up a version where one flows right into the other.
They do seem to follow comfortably into each other. I mean, in fact, the first piece is called Surface Tension, where the trees meet the sky.
And the Oscar Tango, is that really a tango? It's, as I recall from Signs of Life, it's considerably slower than what...
It's not really a tango. It has a certain whiff of essence of tango about it, but it's not a authentic tango.
Now, for that piece, you'll be moving to the piano.
Yeah.
The rest of the ensemble will be just the string trio: Jeffrey, Bob, and Helen playing the viola, violin, and cello, respectively.
That's right. Very good.
All right. Well, let's hear it. Surface Tension, Where the Trees Meet the Sky, and the Oscar Tango. Once again, live performances from the Penguin Cafe Orchestra. Helen, I'd like to ask you something. You've been with the ensemble since the first album, is that right? Pretty much straight on through. Simon was talking before about how these pieces have sort of grown up and now they're kind of teenagers. I guess you've sort of watched them grow as you've headed through the last, 10, 15 years?
Yes, very much so. And in fact, we've only started playing Surface Tension again just now. So, yeah, it's a new teenager, this piece.
So this really is something that you dropped for a few years.
Yes, very much so. And it's slightly differently instrumented and it is different, it's changed.
Yeah. The nice thing about our stuff seems to be that it holds its energy. None of the pieces have become dated or that sort of thing. And so all the pieces actually, I mean, we play all sorts of versions of the different pieces at various times. That's the way it is.
The last time you were here, when you performed at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, you had a dancer with you. Now it seems that I heard that you actually wrote some music for a ballet, or was the ballet scored to some music you had already written?
Basically, I re-orchestrated some pieces already existing from the previous albums for a ballet in London, which was a kind of another form of existence for the pieces, which was away from us completely. I mean, these pieces are performed, we're not even there. Which is quite curious. And the ballet is actually actually called Still Life at the Penguin Cafe. So it's a Penguin Cafe musical thing happening, and we're not there, which is quite nice. It just shows that the whole thing has sort of life in it, and it has sort of unexpected manifestations.
And it still sounds like your music, even though it's a completely separate group of people. Yeah, it still
seems to be. It's about the same sort of things.
All right, we're going to conclude with a piece called Giles Farnaby's Dream. Giles Farnaby was a pretty obscure fellow, wasn't he? Or at least in this country, I guess, maybe.
Except to himself, yes. Yeah. He was a minor English Renaissance composer. He was actually I think he was what they called a fitter as well, and I'm not quite sure what a fitter is, but it was one of the trades. You know, like a plumber or something. I don't actually know what a fitter did.
I think it's a plumber. Something. You told me that before. I'm sure it's
well, maybe he's a plumber. Maybe he fitted drains or something.
It's something to do with domestic.
Renaissance plumbing.
Yeah, he lived in London in the Renaissance, and he was involved in Hermetic science, and he also was familiar with the leading composers of the time, like John Bull and
Orlando Gibbons.
Yeah, and he was involved with them, and he wrote one or two pieces, I think, are masterpieces, and he wrote some very long, very dreary pieces. Giles and his Dream, I think, is the greatest of his pieces. It's very short. That we only use a fragment of it. His piece does, in fact, go on for quite a long time. It lasts about a minute in all, but we only use the first 20 seconds of it. And it's a real masterpiece, his Dream. So we use a fragment of it as a kind of manifesto almost in this piece.
All right, well, before we hear it, and we will bring back the whole ensemble for this final piece, I want to thank you, Simon, and the rest of the ensemble for being here with us today. It's been a lot of fun hearing the music and having the chance to present you in a live radio context like this. Our engineer was Edward Haber, and we got some able assistance from your own sound engineer, Doug Beveridge, and we appreciate his help as well. And I guess we're ready to hear the final piece, Giles Farnaby's Dream from the Penguin Cafe Orchestra. the Penguin Cafe Orchestra, performing live in our studios on this edition of New Sounds, and a piece called Giles Farnaby's Dream. Steve Fletcher played the piano, Robert Loveday violin, Jeffrey Richardson played viola, some mandolin, and some ukulele, Julio Segovia played percussion, Paul Street on guitar, ukulele, and quattro, Helen Liebman played the cello, and Simon Jeffs himself playing quattro and piano, various others.